Now, I'd like to ask Dr. Lee to kick us off with your presentation, please.
Thank you. In fact, I think Ben's remarks, in a way, frame what I'm going to present. And I got a feeling Chip might have a lot of things to say to some of your remarks about universities. Okay, we talk about schools, we talk about universities. Given my limited experience, today I'm going to focus on higher education and universities. Now, to reimagine, well, first of all, we have to figure out what is it that we are reimagining. And I think all of you would know what is a university, or do you? What is a university? Let me start with a different question. Is this a telephone? Really stupid question, right? Obviously, there's a smartphone and there's a cassette tape. But how often do you use your smartphone to make voice calls now? I don't know about you, but for me, probably 1% of the time I would use my so-called phone to make phone calls. The other 99% of the time I would be doing WhatsApping and texting and surfing the net and all those other things. So you take away the telephone function from my, say, iPhone, I'm happy. But you take away all the non-phone functions from my iPhone, I think I would be like a drug addict with withdrawal symptoms. Yeah. So what is a university? And you look at the cassette, how does the cassette tape come into the picture? I was a foreign student in the United States in the 70s. In those days, if you make international calls, it means it's emergency. You have to go to a special place to make international phone calls. So I wanted to stay in touch with my family, like you all do. So I did. I would speak into a cassette tape recorder and post it and sing. At that time, it's Hong Kong. The postman would deliver it to my mother, and she would do the reverse. So the cassette tape was my telephone in the 70s. So the point is not about phone or cassette, but we need to reframe when we talk about something before we can talk about imagination. But before I move on, I have to say it has now come full circle. My mother, who is now in the mid-80s, we bought her a dumb smartphone because she couldn't handle a smartphone, too complicated. And she didn't know how to really use the smartphone. But she knows how to speak and do a voice recording and then WhatsApp to me. So now she's using the smartphone as a cassette tape. So back to my real question. What is a university? And I'm sure you all have an opinion, and I think we're short of time, so I will not go around and ask you. But to me, there are three main things a university today, a university would do, or a traditional university would do. Well, they do research and scholarship, extending knowledge and all that. They do teaching and learning, and these two, I think, are all very good. And the third thing, they are a monopoly which can issue degrees. I do have this question, why only universities can issue degrees? Because is higher education just getting a degree? And what is a degree anyway? Someone comes to me and say, I have a degree from Wharton, or someone comes to me and says, I have a degree from SUSS. What does that tell me about the person? Now hold those thoughts. But I also want to point out the not so good side of university. Ben makes some comments. I look at it from a slightly different perspective. First of all, universities are very expensive institutions. I think any significant university will cost maybe $1 billion. I don't know what's UB's annual budget. It's around there. And most of the time, it's taxpayers' money. So you have to think about it. It's something very expensive. And they are exclusive. The more prestigious a university is, by definition, it will exclude more people. So it's not always a bad thing. For example, in Finland, with only 10% of people who want to be teacher can become teacher, is a good thing. But with good universities keep turning away more people than they can accept. Think about it. Is there something wrong with this model? And these days, all companies need to cater to customers' needs, and they need to cater to the individual needs of individual customers. But you go to a typical university, you pick from the curriculum. Maybe a faculty committee decide this is what you should learn. And you may have some elective, but very much universities are centered around the professors and the curriculum they have developed. There's very little real personalization for individual students, and students are all different. And finally, I don't know whether Chip agrees with me, universities are very slow-moving, slow-changing creatures. Why? Well, they are externally regulated. You know, I'm not running a university, but I cannot move without the say-so from my regulator. But I think another more important point is universities are highly self-regulated, in the sense that even if the leaders want to do certain things, you can't do it. Any universities that want to make big changes, typically you're held up by long debates and objections from the faculty and from the alumni. They will ask a lot of very deep questions, but in the meantime, nothing much changes. And okay, you say, oh, Casey, you are not in a university, so you can make all these pot shots. Yeah. Well, there's a university president. Some of us know him. Graham Davis was the Vice Chancellor of University of London, and University of London is SIM Speaker's partner. And Mr. Jeff Garrett runs Australia's biggest research institution. So they wrote a small book, How to Run a University, or How to Manage the Research Community. Herding cats, that means it's impossible. Right? So you just think of any other industry with its high cost, it's kind of exclusive, it's more product producer-centric and not so much customer-centric, and they're slow to move. In a local slang, we say, sure die. So really, universities should be disrupted, given how universities are. I know I'm making broad generalizations like what Ben did, but the direction we are leading to is really universities should be disrupted. But why are they so resilient? They're still around. Society still love the universities, and partly because alumni don't want anything to be done to my university. But partly, and I think Ben didn't give enough credit, universities do innovate. They do make a lot of internal changes, and they try to stay relevant. But Ben also made the point that only real disruptions come from outside the system. You look at disruption from outside. I mean, you're familiar with this. And the significant point from this is that disruptions typically come from not something from within even the sector. And also, there's an issue of how to regulate these disruptors. Is Facebook a media company or a platform? I think the debate going on. And Uber and Grab Taxi and all that, they are disrupting public transport. But what kind of regulations do we have? So regulations are always falling behind. So let me, since I have only a couple more minutes, go on to how do you disrupt university from the outside? Sorry, my finger is a bit... Here's an example very familiar to most of you. Coursera, in a way, is like a consortium of university, but it is not a university. And it allows many universities and professors to offer their courses online. But my point is not online. The point is now there's someone standing between the universities and the student. And then a lot of interesting things can happen. And I want to make a quick comment on the experience of Coursera. And some of you might be more knowledgeable about this than me. But the one key thing that I learned from Coursera's experience is they started with the noble intention of allowing more people, maybe people from underdeveloped countries, to get a university degree. But what turned out, most of the students who actually complete a course on Coursera already have degrees. And very often, they do not complete the whole program. So people say it's a failure, but actually it's not. Most of them are working adults trying to learn something just in time because the job requires them to pick up something, so they go on to Coursera, pick something from, I don't know, MIT or one of these top universities. So the starting point is offer degree program, but at the end, it's the students pick what I need. I think that's a very deep point that we should think about. Now, I have to say, there's another example. Disruption from outside. Now, this one a bit old, 33, 34 years ago. Well, SIM, for those of you not so familiar with SIM allow people to take degree courses from 12 different good universities without those universities physically being in Singapore. And I think it was a disruption to Singapore's university space. It was a quiet revolution, but it's very impactful. When you think about it, we have 6 universities in Singapore, but we actually have 12 universities right here. And every year, we have tens of thousands of students studying. That the only thing is, we are not maximizing what we can do with these 12 universities in a way co-locating right here at SIM. When I first joined, I came from IT world, and IT world, we talk about vertical integration, component, mix and match. So one very obvious thing, and I had a discussion with UB, the provost at that point in time. I said, why don't we allow our students to pick modules from UB, pick some modules from another university, pick some module from yet another university, a bit like what I mentioned, the Coursera kind of experience. At that time, Coursera did not exist, but I couldn't do it, even though everyone said it's a great idea. Why? Then the issue is whose degree the student's going to get. And if you don't have a degree, the student's not going to go with it, and the parents not going to fund it. And then under whose jurisdiction? American university, British university, all have very different accreditation framework, and et cetera, et cetera. So I was not able to make this idea happen, but I want to, and this is my main point today, and that chip and then we interact with the participant. I have many ideas. This is really the one thing I want to put to you. There have been innovations from within a university like Bench University, but I think it's not real university. It's just disguising itself as a university. So you can operate within the system. So I think universities are here to stay. And in addition to universities, knowledge these days, like a lot of AI, actually the most interesting things are happening in tech companies, not necessarily in universities. And there are lots of online resources. Some come from companies like SPH. And you have individuals, you have enterprises. And ministers talk about diversity, many colors. Okay, I see many different colors. But when I choose particular university, I end up with only one color. So it's like I'm teased with many different colors, but at the end I will choose one. That sounds like marriage, but that's a different discussion. Okay. So what I propose is allow, it doesn't have to be an entity, but it's the notion that you have someone from outside the universities, but work with the universities, but open up. And especially now with technology, it's a lot easier to do this, to allow students to do that mix and match and learn what they want. And sometimes the best module in a particular area could be from a not-so-famous university, so I can mix and match. And then you extend this concept further, it applies to lifelong education. You apply to any learning, it's basically create both the resources and a way to assess, and then, okay, we need to figure out all the evaluation and all that. And I think the biggest, this is my last slide, the biggest obstacle to this is not so much the idea, but really regulations and social convention lags way behind. People still look for a university, a degree. But I can see people who are working from the reality of workplace, they are not so obsessed about this. So it's hard to make this happen maybe at the undergraduate level for fresh school leavers. So I think I stop here. I run out of time, and I'd like to now hand over to Chip.
Thank you very much, Dr. Lee. Okay. Okay, and so over to you, Chip.
I think a series of themes are beginning to emerge from the conversations that we're having, and I'm going to break my remarks up into sort of some driving forces and then the disruptions that I see coming from them that feed on the themes that we're hearing. And the first sort of driving force that I see happening in the external world outside of education is the digital economy that has come along. And the digital world is changing the way we gather information. It's fundamentally changing the economy, how we communicate. And this will ultimately drive increases through artificial intelligence, for example, in productivity that we're using, and it'll create fabulous wealth for lots of people. It'll be good for society. Higher education is never been in higher demand. In response to these changes to the economy that we're seeing, everybody sees the fact that they need to know more after, say, they're 18 years old in order to be effective in the economy, to fulfill their life dreams, build a family, generate wealth, and seek happiness. And so the desire for education and more education has never been stronger globally. At the same time, the four-year degrees that we're offering were developed in the 19th century. Right? We're now in the 21st century, and so the content of them isn't being focused on the broad population. In the 19th century, you were educating a small elite of people that went off and were priests and ran governments and that sort of things. And now we're talking about expanding education to a larger and larger fraction of the population so that more of us can gain the fruits of the knowledge and work in this digital economy. And that's a problem because the educational model we're using is very expensive. It costs a lot to, for example, run a university and give everybody four-year degrees. So there's huge demand, and at the same time, the costs are going up. And this is leading to a lot of dissatisfaction and concern about how we're educating and the content of degrees and that sort of things. I then, therefore, see sort of three disruptions coming from this. The first is that alternative educational models are going to come forward, whether it's Minerva or whether it's micro-credentialing. That we will come up with different ways of thinking about transferring knowledge to individuals so that they can be successful. And you'll begin to see two-year degrees, four-year degrees. You'll have to have lifelong learning. There'll have to be certificates and badges. And this monopoly that universities have on giving their credential isn't going to go away. The public needs to know that if you get a certificate from SIM or a badge from UB, that it means something, that it's been regulated, and that we're able to know that it has some content. But I see a differentiation in degrees that will and credentials that will come forward. Secondly, in this new economy, I think that students need to know more, not less, in the areas of humanities and communication skills and cultural and historical knowledge. That will lead into this translational, the fluid intelligence that the students will need to have to keep up with the very rapid changing. Again, the Trudeau statement that we've never gone faster and never again will we go so slowly. That the ability to develop these fluid thinking concepts will be very important, and that isn't simply teaching people more about how to solve differential equations. Thirdly, I think that new measures of quality in education will emerge. That what we will look for in education won't simply be that you got your certificate or your badge or credential from an elite exclusive university. Rankings will have to change. We as a society will have to think differently about how we look at our institutions and say, that's a good institution. It won't be based on this historical world that we're living in right now that has established the top 100 universities. There'll be more differentiation in our thought processes about what is a high-quality educational institution. Another thing that is happening because of the digital economy is that the students that are sort of the input into education are changing. The students we have now are digital natives. They learn by working with their cell phone. They learn online. They socialize online. They interact in very different ways, and they gather knowledge in different ways. And at the same time that that's going on, the majority of the faculty are not digital natives. All right, the majority of the faculty are 35, 40, 45, 50, and therefore they don't interact with these new technologies in the same way that the students do. They aren't trained to think about those technologies and how to transfer information. I was fascinated to think that that is not the case in K through 12. The new teachers that are coming out are of that age and know how to think about how to do innovations. But at universities, that isn't what we have. We have an older population of faculty. And so from those sort of factors, I see a series of disruptions coming away. The first is that the way we teach students has to change. This active learning concept, the fact that it isn't a sage on the stage lecturing, the faculty aren't the source of knowledge. That isn't going to work anymore because the student can check anything I say in the classroom instantly and tell me that I'm wrong. All right, and they do, okay? And that will be important, that now we engage the students differently and teach them how to learn. That will be very important. I think we'll get more of a mixture of in-class and out-of-class experiences that will come forward. The definition of what is a class and how are you educated. You go around the world being educated, and that will have to change. In the United States, we have this concept of a credit hour that governs universities, and that will have to go away because the way we're learning and what is a course, what is a class, what is a credit hour will have to change. I think the content of a PhD degree will also have to change. The PhD is the terminal degree in education and prepares you to be a professor. And right now, to gain the PhD, it's a research-based program. You advance your discipline. You don't prepare yourself to be a professor. And that has to change. We have to have the PhD training will alter so that you actually learn some pedagogy. You learn how to teach in the classroom and deal with the students in different ways. And then I think that universities are going to have to figure out how to retool the faculty that we already employ. Tenure is a fact. We're not going to get rid of it anytime soon. It's sort of embedded in the concept of a university. We will find ways around it, us insidious administrators. But in point of fact, the faculty that we have aren't going to turn over. They represent the knowledge and wisdom of all human endeavors. They contain that ability to transfer culture to the next generation. So you want them to work with the student and move forward. But they are used to being sages on the stage, and to work with the new student, they have to change, and therefore a lot of professional development will have to take place in universities for the current faculty that we have. Finally, the big topical area that I think will have to change is sort of in the way research universities undertake and do their research. That the sorts of problems that we look at are going to have to change. And right now we categorize knowledge and put it into disciplines. And the discipline can be English or chemical engineering or classics, that sort of things. But the problems we as a society are facing require that you work in these teams. It doesn't mean that you need to create new disciplines. What we have to do is figure out how to take people that have deep domain knowledge, that have been trained to think deeply in their particular discipline, but then work on teams to solve problems. And the sorts of research that we do at university and the way we teach students to work to have an impact on society when they leave will require them to be able to work across these disciplines. And so I see disruptions coming in how universities define disciplines, how we come up with degrees. A short anecdote is we're creating degrees that require architecture and planning, engineering, and arts and sciences to actually bring together their course material to come come up with a degree in, I don't know, sustainable manufacturing, advanced robotic technologies. It's a fascinating series of courses. One of the big challenges we have is which dean shakes the hand of the graduate. It's the same question you were asking about how you do it, right? Who gets that privilege? And that tells you about the administrative sort of challenges that universities face when we try to build these programs. So with that, I'll stop and be happy to participate in the conversation.
Thank you, Chip. Okay, now it's question time. Does anyone have a question? Yes, yes, sir.
He's president of SUSS.
Okay, this is...
I'm Jong Hee Kiat from the Singapore University of Social Sciences, SUSS. I would say that there's hope in the university system. Casey talked about universities being high cost, exclusive, not customer, not student-centric, over-regulated. But there are universities which are moving away from this model. And SUSS is one of them.
I set you up for this.
And even in the rest of the university world, there's already discussion about the disruptions affecting universities. And there's discussion about individualized learning, using IT and online and analytics and so on. And there is another discussion which is happening, which is about how universities can more greatly engage industry and other centers of knowledge to combine together in order to produce the right type of learning for society. And I think that's the way to go. Universities should not be exclusive. Universities should recognize powers or centers of knowledge which are present either in places like even SIM or in industry and so on. There's another hope, Professor Zukowski. In SUSS, we don't have tenureship.
Huh? As an administrator, that's fabulous. But
yeah,
teacher, the professor, that might be a little question.
And to your thing about who shakes the hand, my chancellor shakes the hands of all our graduates.
Very good.
But I want to comment also on the earlier, just a short one, earlier presentation by Ben. And he talks about how we need to be able to get the students to break up and then integrate and so on. And what he describes, I would say, and having the wisdom, but I think what he describes is not a university education per se. It is lifelong learning. And all that wisdom and all that breaking up and bringing things together to solve problems is not just taught at university. It's not only obtained at university. It's a lifelong journey. But actually the university, in understanding this, should just seed the behavior and the thinking of students so that they can go on a lifelong journey of doing all of that. I don't think we can achieve all of it in 4 years in a university. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Oh, yes, we have another question.
Yeah, my name is Gyan Nagpal. I'm the author of Talent Economics. And the question I had was, you see, one of the big shifts from the industrial economy to the knowledge economy that we see in business, we see it with entrepreneurs, is the tolerance of failure. In the industrial economy, it was process, it was quality, and no defect. And now we see a lot of successful entrepreneurs actually respecting failure, because failure teaches us something. Success teaches us nothing. And the ability to fail fast, the ability to fail often, and respect it as a part of the journey to success is something that I think new knowledge sort of startups teach us quite substantially. But I don't see the same happening in education, right from primary education up to tertiary education. I think the respect for this shift hasn't necessarily been imbibed. So just interested in your thoughts, that how do we grapple with this, as we're bringing up the next generation of thinkers, problem solvers, entrepreneurs through the educational process.
So I would start and say that when it comes to disrupted education, I'll just start here and then I can give a more serious comment. But it is hard to imagine that if it's your son or daughter that you want them to have gone through a failed educational system. Right? I mean, that's the sort of the difficulty in the way we change education, is that we can't afford it when it's sort of my kids that are going through it. So we as a society worry a lot about that. But within that educational system, how do we teach kids that it's okay to fail? And I go back to the Finnish model, where what the students get when they're young is a sense of self-confidence. That it's okay to fail if what you get is a learning experience from it, but you have to have the self-confidence. And so building the self-confidence where you don't know the answer, you could go right or left, and you don't know which one's going to give you the right answer. It's okay, because at least you learn from that experience. But then you have to have the self-confidence to know that, all right, next time I'll go the other way. That it isn't life-threatening or career-threatening to go through it. And I think it starts in preschool and goes through the way the Finnish model builds in this sense of self-confidence that you have to build into the student. How do we do it at university? In a sense, you have to de-emphasize the catastrophic impact of taking a bad exam. Often there are some university systems where at the very end of the course it's a binary exam that says, did you learn the material or not? Whereas in an American system, you're continuously doing problem sets all the way through, and those build through to a demonstration of whether or not you use the material. So in a sense, you're forced to, you're given the opportunity to fail and to learn from failure throughout the course at sort of each incremental step. But it has to be built in. It has to be done in an intentional way to build that self-confidence and to build the ability to take on the risks and learn from the risks.
I'd like to just make two quick points. The first one on this notion of fail fast. Stanford University is right in the middle of Silicon Valley, and its management magazine just had an interview with a successful serial entrepreneur. I don't want to go too deep into detail, but the entrepreneur said the Silicon notion of fail fast is a fallacy. He said it's wrong to take this because in a situation of an app like WhatsApp, you really could ramp it up very fast. But in many other fields, it takes much longer. So this serial entrepreneur, and he is more of a social entrepreneur than tech entrepreneur. His point is, if we take this fail fast to the extreme, you're not giving enough time for your plant to really grow. And so his point is, don't go to the extreme. Sometimes you need time. So that's my second point. We should not honor failure. I've said this a few times also on TV panel. We should honor the learning from failure. It seems like a slight change of words, but it's really communicate very different things to, especially to young people. We shouldn't tell people failure is good. It becomes an excuse, or it will be interpreted wrongly. I come back to my and tell my father, I'm very happy today. I learned a lot today because I failed many times. So I know actually we are on the same page, right? We should say honoring from learning from failure. And I think VCs, they invest in people who have a track record of emerging from a failure and make something successful. So these are the two quick points.
Thank you, Dr. Lee. Are there any other questions? Yes, okay.
I am Ronald Tan from SIM. Just a very, very simple question. And I would like to invite your comments and critique. Would you think that because our system, the education system per se, have been too good and too focused in teaching students to understand the questions, but we neglect or fail to spend time teaching them how to understand the questioner? Okay, think about Dr. Liu talk about care before cure, And I think Ben commented about that kind of question, asking about how do you teach critical thinking. So we focus a lot in teaching students how to find answers to the question and understanding the question, but perhaps it's time to think about teaching our students how to understand the questioner behind the question.
Who would like to go first?
I believe that is indeed important. It gets down to what you're trying to teach in a particular course and subject matter, that a lot of the social skills and communication skills are that I believe need to be emphasized, and a lot of the panelists believe need to be emphasized in education, get down to listening and being able to understand what question is being asked and how can you communicate better to understand how to answer a particular sort of question. So I do think that that's an important piece of the information. But once you've listened hard to the questioner and you're able to define that the way it's being phrased might not be the actual core to the question that is coming at them, you still have to have the skills and the knowledge in order to take whatever is in your domain expertise and apply it to that particular question. But the communication skills are crucial given the rapidly diversifying economy that we have right now. You have to be able to hear the other person and understand what is going on in their minds and what they might be asking that is different from the words that they're using.
I have a comment, not so much on how and the pedagogy. I don't have an answer. The way I look at it is to bring the students and the learning outside the classroom a lot more. And I think now it's a very common notion that in university, and I think as you build that into your curriculum, you learn different disciplines, but you have to integrate them in some project which is in a real-world context. So some of those things I don't think you can teach. But when you throw the student into the real world and have to solve a real-world problem, you quickly figure out there's no this is the question and there's a model answer. You need to figure out, with you're doing some, let's say, send to a school in Nepal and do something social learning. You need to figure out what's the context, who are the stakeholders, and you go through that whole process. So I think a lot of these things, which probably it's Ben's point about you cannot teach creative learning, problem solving. You learn different things, and then you create an environment for the student, or more often a team of students, to do something with what you have learned, and that there's a real world impact and feedback. That's how you learn. So looking to pedagogy and all that, probably there's only so much you can do.
I'll give a quick example that, to your point, to illustrate it, is that the law school at the University of Buffalo has a series of clinics. One of them is in the local cancer hospital, and then they build teams around families that are coming in. And the lawyers are in there working with the family. And the dean of the law school finds that is very important in the development of the lawyer, because the family isn't asking questions about the law, right? They don't know how to formulate it in the form of a legal question about what are the implications for my will, or what are the implications about signing away rights and that sort of things. They're dealing with a diagnosis of cancer. And so the law student has to be able to listen to what they're saying and then translate that into what the legal question is. And you do it in this example by going outside the university and applying it in sort of the real world where you're forced to think differently about it.
Very good example.
Okay. Yes, ma'am, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Sure. My name is Katie. I actually work for the SIMUB programs here in Singapore. I have a more practical question. As an administrator, how do you, as the provost or as the CEO, what advice can you give to administrators to work within the current system to motivate faculty and alumni, which you shared are sometimes obstacles towards change and progress in a university, because they want their degree to remain the same and be meaningful and are more hesitant towards change. How can you incentivize them to make these sort of changes in the curriculum for future students, to make them more student-centric, to involve more technology, and to make them more interdisciplinary? How can you incentivize faculty and alumni?
Thank you. We'll take the second question from Brandon.
Okay.
Please introduce yourself.
I felt compelled to come up because I've been mentioned a couple of times already. I'm not a questioner per se, but I am the regulator. And I am going to take a risk in responding to Casey. So it's really more of a comment on, I think also quite pertinent to what the last questioner just mentioned. I think it's important to know that while universities have value and what they teach has value, not everything of value needs to come from the university or from any kind of, I guess, officially sanctioned monopoly, as Casey would put it. I mean, the issuance of a degree is a monopoly. I think in many jurisdictions there's control of that. But that's not to say that only degrees have value. And quite ironically, I think the answer is in kind of Casey's slides, right? I mean, on the one hand, you have the disruptor, the people who want to make change to the system. And there are the disrupted, the people who the change is going to be quite anxiety-laden kind of situation. So if I could say from a regulator's perspective, I think there's enough room in the rules today for a lot of this experimentation to take place. And in my view, I mean, there's nothing stopping SIM or any institution for that matter to work with partners that are willing to also kind of break from whatever strictures that they're subjected to and create something of value that you can find enough people, let's say in the industry, to want to recognize that. I mean, it's like everybody recognizes the kind of legal currency, but there are many other things which people also accept as exchange of value. So I guess what I would say is I would encourage, these experiments to take place, I guess, within whatever rules that need to be in place. And at least from my perspective, I'll be quite happy to see how we can help those things go along and to kind of benefit students and I guess our future generations from what we do here today.
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Excellent. Yeah.
Well, how to motivate changes in a university, I think this has to be answered.
Okay. First, before I talk about how to motivate faculty, I'll talk a little bit about regulators and how you can work outside. It's long been my feeling, since sort of MOOCs came around, that once Google starts defining the Coursera courses that you have to pass before they'll interview you, the degree goes away in terms of value. That the student will then define, once the industry, there's enough online, for example, for the industry to define what they're looking for in their employees, that's what students will do. They won't come to a university for a degree because they will know this is what I need to work at Google, or this is what I need to work at Exxon, that sort of things. And every so often you ease into it, and then the fun question is the structure of the university degree we have now actually what the corporations are looking for, right? And we'll find out, because this will actually begin to come and disrupt education, that there's so much available online, corporations will now define what they're looking for. Certainly when I spent a lot of time thinking about how to motivate faculty and how to make them aware of the world that we're in. And I struggle with exactly that. I find periodically that I begin to think of those in particular disciplines as colorblind, that I have red and green patterns and they are genetically not able to see those patterns that are governing their lives. And they simply can't see them, and they can't see them because of the way they've been educated and the way that they are incentivized. And until I can figure out the technology that translates those patterns into things that they can see, progress is just enormously slow. And the result is that myself and my team at UB spend a lot of time simply talking to the faculty. That it is, you can present facts about the way the world is changing and what students need to have. Often at universities in the United States now, these are financial issues, that the students are no longer interested in your course, therefore you can't offer it, and if you don't find something else to do, I can't pay your salary. Okay, that begins to get attention when you, but that of course is very anti-intellectual and reduces the questions down to issues of finances, and that's just an anathema to faculty, to reduce it down to, you know, wisdom and knowledge and the crucible of light to finances, dollars and cents. It's a tough conversation, okay? Let me assure you. But but that's the struggle that we actually have, is convincing the faculty. I begin to think periodically that the faculty are motivated by having, they studied a subject and become an expert in it because they believe in its value. It's intrinsically interesting, it's intrinsically valuable. And so in order to capture their attention, I'm now trying, and we'll see whether or not it works, the concept that if students aren't taking your class, then you're no longer proselytizing properly. Right? That nobody's going to gain the knowledge and wisdom of your subject because they're not attracted to it. Therefore, you need to change the way you're presenting that information. And you might have to add new material to it. You have to reinvent it, or nobody's going to know the knowledge and wisdom that you're translating because nobody wants it. Okay, and so I'm trying that to see if that isn't the technology that makes the pattern visible to the faculty, who are very committed, very good at what they do, but the world is sort of ratcheted forward and they need to figure out how to catch up. Well, that's how I think about it anyway. So anyway, thank you for the question. It's a difficult problem.
Can I be your agent?
Yeah.
What does that mean?
I'm going to get a book written by you, probably. It's called Hurting Cats #2.
Yeah.
All right.
Yes.
Okay, one last question, please.
Thank you. My name is Kwan from At Sunrise Global Chef Academy. I love the topics of the panels about, you know, breaking the mold, reimagining. I also love the space that we are. I'm here in SIM and the private education space, but I love the fact that the regulators have spoken. I'll get into trouble if I say this, but anyway, we are a small little cooking school. You're talking about universities. We have 6 degree articulations with 3 global universities outside of Singapore. Our 2 star chefs, literally, are one SMU graduate and the other one NUS graduates, and they're both 1 Michelin star chefs today. I think, you know, I came into this education space because 25 years ago, Singapore was promoting Singapore education, which I loved. But over the last 17 years, I have to say that we're getting more and more stifled, and it's really almost it's really difficult. I think that if we can go back to the mission, the vision of Singapore education, that will encompass, you know, reimagining universities, how we tied up, how we take courses from all the different places, the lifelong education, the skills future. So my question is, what do you think if we can bring that vision back and then connect all the dots, especially in the private education space?
I have been saying the same thing to the authority. Our minister has left. We should have asked make that comment a bit earlier. But, I agree with you. That's all I can say.
Do you have any? Could I get both of you to make some closing comments?
I forgot the permanent secretary.
Yes.
So,
Okay. We note that.
I'm in the public sector, but I think the sorts of creativity that we're describing it's essential that we figure out how to rearrange things. University at Buffalo is part of SUNY, the State University of New York. It has 64 campuses, but it goes everywhere from community colleges up to major research universities. So we're all part of a single system. And one of the challenges that we have is how to incorporate the sort of going from a research university to a culinary school. And we have all of those within the system, but getting us to not be competitive and work together for educating the next generations of students remains it's a cultural barrier and associated with academic hubris.
Yes, sir.
Good morning. Thank you so much. My name is Parikshit Sharma. Is the education system which is based on the commercial, or is it something to do with, are we responsible for the world? There are challenges in Africa. South Africa is facing challenges of water.
Sure.
Are the universities the ones responsible for creating people who are sensitive? There's a water crisis. It is just knocking on our door. Are we creating students who are innovative enough to think of such critical things? I don't know if that's critical thinking. Are we creating students who are thinking critically to find critical solutions for problems? Or are we driven so commercially that we produce students who get hired by companies who will give them good salaries?
Okay.
So it's a slightly challenging thing. It's not only dependent on universities, or is it also dependent on the governments, and who's responsible?
My indirect answer, in a way, it's what the minister said earlier, maybe more in the context of schools. We just need diversity. So we can have some universities that are very focused on, say, producing tech people for the tech industry. You can have universities that very often associate with some faith-based organization who focus a lot more on certain values. So we can't, the university can't solve all the problems of the world, but if we get different universities to bring different things to the world and find a way to channel the right students to the right universities, then there would be, I think, the right mix of students coming out who would do the right thing. But I'm a bit concerned because I'm running SIM, and I have friends who keep telling me, how can you run an education institution and you have to run it with commercial discipline to make some surplus? I think we need to separate that from the quality of teaching. So once we use terms like commercial, too commercial, it's a little bit loaded already, the word. So maybe I stop here because my main point is we should have diversity and more diversity in the higher education as well as in school landscape. And the earlier comment about from Sunrise founder allowing private institutions to come in fact, the other thing, another benefit, it would add a lot more to the diversity. And I think we need that.
When we were describing what the purpose of a university is, I think of one of the key things we do at a university is to transfer culture. And that's important for stable societies, that we teach that culture. Some of it is our history and our values. Some of it is the technologies we use to sustain ourselves. But that's the public good. That's why the public invests in education, as it sustains our society. As the cost of education has gone up in the United States, and more of the cost of education is transferred to the individual, it reinforces the notion that education is about personal well-being, and that you get an education for personal good. You get it because I'm going to get a good job. I'm going to get wealth from getting this education. And you begin to lose that public good for why we have universities and what we're looking for in higher education. And so I do see that the tension in the system on public good versus private good is growing, at least in the United States right now, and it is something to worry about.
Oh, okay. Unfortunately, on that note, we have to end. But I think that what was most encouraging to me was that, two leaders of higher education institutions are constantly questioning how they can do things better. And so, I mean, they are in a way self-disrupting. And that will bring us to the end of this panel discussion. We have a third and final one, but let's thank Dr. Lee and Professor Suchowski, please.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chris.